So, as the introduction said, I'm from Brigham Young University, but in this case, more from the American Association of Variable Star Observers. And hopefully give you some idea of opportunities to observe. Transiting, this is very similar to the transiting planet work. That's why I said that was a great lead-in for me. Some of the same time periods of observing come up. And so my background is I've been chasing variable stars for about 35 years. It was a project when I was an undergraduate that I was handed a variable star and said, here, do something with it. And I've been chasing them ever since. And I found that that's been good for me because I've actually used those same objects to teach my undergraduate students here. I also do enjoy public nights with Dobsonians and other public telescopes. I don't get as many opportunities at that anymore, but it's still fun when I get a chance. I'll skip the next one. And the last one, my wife is a lecturer about 4 miles down the road here at Utah Valley University. But she is actually originally from the South Shore in the Boston area. So I've had a chance to be up in New England there and her taking me around. And she actually publishes with me sometimes. Okay, so pulsating variable stars. These are quite literally stars that are changing, which makes them, every time I say this to my students, they're really shocked that a star can change in radius and at the same time changing in temperature. And when we talk about looking up in the sky, if the sun were doing this, you would actually see, it's not a huge change, but it would slightly change color and change radius while you're watching it. Now, the long period variables do this over a long time, but the ones I like do this in hours or less than hours, which makes it a really scary thought to think about looking at a star. If you lived around one of these, what it would look like. And I should have turned that off, but okay. So this is you can kind of see to the right-hand side there, the star kind of slightly changing. It's only about 3%. But there's a lot we can learn from these objects, and we use them for other studies. And honestly, this is what I've wandered off in research over the years. My dissertation for my PhD was actually in large scale structure, so cosmology type things. But then when I got done with that, I went back to variable stars. So I always come back to variable stars. So I appreciate anybody that likes them. And historically, now this isn't one that that I would be interested in as much research-wise, but the first of these pulsators goes back to the 1500s with Omicron Ceti. You can kind of see the two pictures off to the right-hand side, where you can kind of see the same star field up on top with the 3 stars here and the 3 here. Then this star and that star, and then something changed here. And so over a period of about a year, a star went from, in the case of Omicron Ceti, was invisible to the naked eye, and then it was visible. And so this one changes about 100 times in brightness over that 1-year cycle. And that's impressive. Just have something that just comes into view. I've never tried actually looking at it with my eye, which would be kind of fun to try at some time. But after that first one, people started finding more of these objects, more that were changing in brightness, and for a while not understanding what was going on. So the long period variables with periods of years, and then obviously the Cepheids were found a little bit after that in the 1700s. And now we got periods of weeks to months. Then the Auralaris come along. And finally, the ones that I really, really like are the Delta Scutis. That's now for the AAVSO purposes, there is the LPV section, observing section, which is the top one, the long period variables. And everything from Cepheids on down here is the SPP section, the short period pulsators. Now, I know I've worked on the other stars, the Cepheids and the Auralaris, but if I'm given a choice, I'm going to do the Delta Scutis. And when kind of looking at that screen earlier, the idea of the stars, of watching a planet transit, you know, that's something normally coming from the test satellite that takes a few hours. And that is great working with students because they can see something happening versus something that takes a long time. And that's why the Delta Scutis are such a wonderful set of targets to chase. And since our some of the work we actually do here on campus is the transiting planets, the students, the transition between the short period pulsators and the transiting planet work is, there's almost no difference in the data acquisition side of things. So I'm going to focus down on these little guys, the Delta Scutis, and in some ways they are similar to the Cepheids and have occasionally been called dwarf Cepheids. And they have some of the same characteristics as the Cepheids. And so if we go to a standard HR diagram where we're plotting the bright and how bright the star really is versus the temperature, and we're used to that main sequence line. And then we have where the Cepheids and the Auralaris, so the Cepheids are up higher, so they're much brighter stars. The Auralaris are a little bit fainter, but they all reside down this instability strip. The Delta Scutis sit down at the bottom here, right down onto the main sequence. And you can kind of see that over here in the middle graph versus the long period pulsators off to the red region. And so we know where they sit. And the nice thing is, I'll talk about a little later, what we actually use these for, why they're of interest to us, why we care about them a little bit in terms of what can they tell us about other parts of the universe. Most times Cepheids come up and people hear about the period luminosity relation, how we can use them as the first rung in scaling the whole universe. The Delta Scutis actually can do the same thing. The problem is they're much fainter. So if you look kind of where they are, they're a much fainter object than the Cepheids. Now, going back with just a little bit more history and why they do what they do. This goes back to 1941 with Sir Arthur Eddington and suggesting a possibility of why the stars were changing in size and changing in brightness. And he said it was, well, he postulated that it was something to do with the transparency of the atmosphere of the star. So as energy was trying to get out, there was a layer in the star that would trap it. And so it wasn't letting the light through. And so it was catching it and heating up and expanding the atmosphere. And then as the atmosphere expanded, the conditions changed. And then it became transparent like a window and let the light out, and gravity pulled the star back down. And then this just was a repeating process over time. So the atmosphere comes back down, the conditions are now make it opaque so it doesn't let light through, expands, lets light through, and just back and forth, back and forth. Some of these stars have been observed for, well, obviously, Delta Cephei itself is hundreds of years, but a lot of even the Delta Scutis have been observed for 100 years or so. So we have a long baseline on a lot of them. And then in 1960s, John Cox gave us what we think of as the mechanism that's driving it. It has to do with just a very specific layer in the star, where helium is partially ionized. And what that means is only certain stars will pulsate. And that's why we have that instability strip area. And so not all stars will do this. Only certain places that have just the right conditions will pulsate. But we see it in the Cepheids, the Aralaris, the Delta Scutis. The mechanism is there, but it's the stars themselves. The Delta Scutis are main sequence. The Cepheids are evolved stars, but they have the right layer in them. So, as I mentioned, why do we care about these? Well, one is that period luminosity relation. If we can measure how long it takes for these stars to go through a single cycle from faint to bright, back to faint, back to bright, if we know the period, we can actually get how bright they really are. So we can basically figure out what kind of light bulb they are. Are they a 10 watt, 100 watt, 1,000 watt? What kind of object, or what's their natural brightness? And once we have that, we compare it to what we see at the telescope, and then we know how far away the object is. And that's been used for a long time now, since the early 1900s, to measure distances. And to give you how important this is, there is a meeting coming up in April to discuss pulsating variable stars and the period luminosity relation and its impact on modern astronomy. And that's going to be held in Budapest. And I'm still trying to find the money to go. That would be a fun meeting to go to. So the period luminosity is something that that these stars are very famous for. When we get to this fast pulsators like the Delta Scutis, you can actually, we think that we can actually see the star evolving with time, that how the pulsation changes as we watch year after year after year. We think we're actually seeing evolution happen before our eyes, which when we teach a descriptive astronomy class, first thing we tell the students, we can't see a single star evolve. We have to look at all kinds of different stars to explain the red giants, the red supergiants, all the different kinds of stars. They don't move too much, but we think we're actually seeing the evolution in them, which is really fascinating. And then finally, there's a field called astroseismology, which lets us see inside the star, see in quotes there. It's one of the few ways we can probe past the surface and actually try to see if we really do understand the inside of these stars. So the pulsators can give us a lot of really neat things, information-wise. So that's why they're important to us. Now, the project we've been working on, a lot of my students work on, is there are a lot of projects nowadays, a lot of surveys that are out there that take repeated observations of the sky. One of them is the Atlas program in Hawaii. They're small telescopes. They only have two, I believe, 16 or 20-inch telescopes. And they just keep looking for asteroids that might hit us. So that Atlas name is basically the LA in it is last alert. So they're looking for the asteroids that are about to hit us, which is an interesting program. But while they're doing that, they're finding other stars that are changing in brightness. And then there's the Assassin survey is looking for supernovas. Again, they're finding other variable stars in their fields. The TESS satellite and the KELP program before the TESS mission they were trying to find transiting planets, but they found a lot of pulsating variables that had never been found before. And then eventually in the southern hemisphere, we'll have the large scale synoptic telescope at the Vera Rubin Observatory that will be doing the southern sky. So all of these programs discover new variables, but when they try to classify them, when they try to say, is this a eclipsing binary? Is it a pulsating star? Is it some other type of variable star? They don't always get the right answer. And some of this is how fast they take data. The LSST will be taking data about once a week of a given spot of sky, which means if a star is pulsating in an hour, it's going to be hard to see that pulsation. And so we see the term cadence showing up a lot nowadays in variable star research. How fast are the frames coming in? And can we see, can we actually see the variation in it? So let's go down here to some of the data we actually see. So here is some data from one a star we call Atlas 70. And you can kind of see there's a couple seasons of observing with a gap between them. And they get maybe 5 or 6 observations in a given night. So it doesn't necessarily give us a good view of the light curve. So here's one of the best single nights of data from Atlas up in the upper left. And then the phased light curve down at the bottom. And so that's not going to tell us a whole lot about the object. This object here was actually one of our test objects for our 24-inch telescope when we first installed it. Then this was the first light. Okay, that's going to be a bad phrase. This was our first light project. So the very first data we took with the telescope, and this is the light curve that came out. And so you see a much more detailed curve from that than what the discovery programs are doing. And here's a couple more light curves that we got for some other ones that came out of the Atlas survey, just to kind of show the light curves that we got. And so those are much tighter, and trying to do an analysis of them, it leaves us a lot more details, a lot more we can see in the light curve and what's going on compared to what we're seeing out of the surveys. So we've been kind of going back and trying to look at these, trying to find, is the period that they've published correct? Do we feel the classification of the object is correct? And talking to some people at the AVSO that run VSX and things, they always ask if we've fed the information back to Atlas so they can improve their designations, and we're trying so that they can go through their data and do a better job with it. Well, how do we go about doing this? Well, we have a lot of fun at BYU in terms of this is our observation deck. It is right in the middle of campus. I will say that, but the top picture on the right, you can kind of see the mountain that's right up against us here on campus. And right at the top, there's a Y. They were going to put BYU on the mountain, but after they put the Y in, they realized it was way too much work. And so they didn't put the B and the U up there. So we just have the Y up on the mountain. But if you look on the deck, the planetarium director and I designed the deck. Each of the pedestals where the telescopes are full piers. They actually go down into the building, and there are stepper stones all the way around everything. And what's neat about that is we can have a public night going in these open areas, and you can kind of see some open areas here, and people walking around the deck. And as long as they don't walk right in front of the telescope, we still get circular images, even while they're out there walking around. So it is kind of a fun observation deck that can be used for a lot of things. The dome in the upper left of the top picture, or in kind of the center of the lower picture, that's where our 24-inch telescope is. That's a plane. Well, I'll show in the next slide the equipment, because a lot of people like to know what telescopes are. Our only real challenge here is this building that kind of blocks a little bit of our northern sky occasionally. But other than that, the campus is fairly dark, amazingly enough. And it's been getting progressively darker. We have a person in the light shop that is very understanding of dark sky. And he's been slowly changing lights on campus to cap them little by little by little. He actually, when the lights are on in the football stadium, so we have a 60-some thousand seat football stadium, we can still work even though the stadium's not that far away from us, because it's basically it is the lights are designed well to point downward. All we have one last area, which is the practice field. That the football practice field is the one place that still gets us, but most of the year we're okay. So you can see all that equipment. And for those that really like equipment, here's what we're running. The 24-inch is a plane wave on a L600 mount, 16-inch RC optical tube on a ME2 mount, a 12-inch TPO on a Paramount ME2, another TPO on a plane wave mount. Our original deck telescope that my poor undergraduate spent a year getting running is a 8-inch Vixen, and then we have a 6-inch as well. So we have a broad range of observing equipment we can use to cover a broad range of brightnesses. Most of the telescopes have some kind of CCD system on it. We are experimenting with CMOS now. And that's going to be the next challenge, is understanding how to get good light curves out of the CMOS cameras. That's something, there's a couple people at the AAVSO that know a lot more about that than I do. And I've been learning from them. We have standard filters, Johnson filters and Sloan filters. If anybody has a configuration, even down to 6-inch telescope with a small camera on it, or even putting a 35mm camera through a telescope, there's a lot of variable star work that short period variable work that people can contribute to. And software we run MaxMDL for the cameras, SkyX for the telescopes, and we run CCD Autopilot to control the two. All those telescopes on the deck are, we will program them, watch them for an hour or so, make sure everything's okay, and we go home and sleep, and then come back and put them away in the morning. The 24 can run all by itself. It could actually, it's automated enough to open the dome, get on the first target, take calibration, and do everything by itself. So that's kind of where we're headed. So this is our campus observatory. One thing, we kind of cheat a little bit in the sense that our campus is at 4,600 feet above sea level. So other people put telescopes on mountains and it's not that high. Then this is the valley elevation out here. So we gain that advantage as we go. We also have some other facilities that we use to chase and get other kinds of data for our targets that we then mix in with the photometry. We have the West Mountain Observatory, which is the pictures up on the upper right here. Somebody flew a helicopter around and took some overhead shots of the observatory. It's much darker. It's at about 7,000 feet. And outside of pointing north, which is Salt Lake City, the rest of the sky is extremely dark. And there are nights when West Mountain will rival Kitt Peak in terms of conditions. I also get data from 2 telescopes up in Canada, in Victoria, Canada. These are for spectroscopic observations of some of our stars. And then the last thing, BYU is a member of the ARC consortium that runs the 3.5 meter telescope in New Mexico. And the bottom right picture down here, the big dome in the picture, that is the 3.5 meter. If you look a little bit further back, kind of to the left of the big dome, off to the side, that is a 20-inch telescope that we can use. And then up a little bit and back to the right, you kind of have that thing that looks kind of like a flower on top. That is the telescope from the Sloan Digitized Sky Survey. That's another separate program from the one we're involved in, but they're both right there on the same mountaintop. So we use this, and then we blend it in with our own campus observations of these stars. We are starting to work with the public university just down the street from us to help their students get some observing experience and be able to handle handle astronomical data and learn about the universe hands-on versus just book learning. And so if anybody wants to play with this and contribute targets, we're trying to get a page put together at the AVSO to provide some targets, information so people could observe and look at the some of these targets. To give you an idea why, there's a group from just the Atlas survey here. There's 1,157 that they classify as pulsators. That's down to about 18th magnitude. Another 700 which are multi-periodic, and then nearly 20,000 that really they're not sure what to classify them as. So just in that, you're well over 20,000 targets that are some are easily accessible down to 6-inch telescopes and right through a wide range. So a lot of people could be involved. The KELT database, which is one chasing transiting planets, they have about 5,000 short period variables that could use follow-up observations. Some of these are known variables, some are not. And so people that like to be the first to really understand a star, there's some great opportunities in here that you could jump in and take data. And then some of the ones for looking at evolution, we need years and years and years of data to see things change, see if a star is constant or if it changes over time. And so we're trying to work to get a little bit more of this on the AAVSO targeting lists so that people can get involved. The main problem here is some of these are not known variables, and so they don't work well in some of the search indexes at AAVSO. So we're working on that. So hopefully the SPP webpage will be getting better, and you'll be able to jump in and take some observations. So what have we found from when we've looked at it? We've looked at probably 50 stars. What we're finding is the classifications that are coming out of some of these programs are wrong. Some of the periods are wrong. A lot of them are multiples, which is not uncommon, but we have ones that they missed by 5 times. They're saying the period is, in this some cases, 4 hours when the period's actually 1 hour. And some have been off by 5 times. So that's kind of critical as we try to use these to study larger scale problems. We have to have the right information here. So there's a lot of fun things to chase in here. And hopefully hopefully people will be interested, be able to take light curves and kind of get a feel for what these stars are doing. And this is something you don't need the fanciest equipment to do this. Some of these stars are too bright. There's some we cannot do on the 6-inch telescope because they're too bright. So there's a lot of opportunity to do light curves. And the one thing we've kind of said with these is, you know, if you got a couple hours, if you can observe for a couple hours, you can get a full light curve and sometimes multiple cycles on some of these objects, and have some fun doing astronomical research. So hopefully we'll have some people jump in and help us observe a little bit if you'd like to. And I know you guys can do it because I one time interviewed at the College of Staten Island, and they had an observatory and they were doing 16th magnitude asteroids. So the sky conditions you have can do these objects without too much trouble.
Okay, quiet bunch tonight. That is all I have. If nobody has anything else to say, we'll close the meeting and shut things down for the night.